Hi, I'm Somer Hackley,
Hi, I'm Zen Mac. This is the Art of Search Hiring Manager series.
and these are stories and insights about all things hiring. Well, Zen, it is so good to catch up with you again. So,
Hi, Somer.
hello. I have a burning question for you. Uh, so, the hiring
Bracing
manager,
myself.
yes. So, the hiring manager usually has an idea of what they're going to ask candidates on that interview.
Mm, yeah,
Usually.
usually.
Uh, And usually they're not the only person interviewing candidates through the process. There's other people involved, right? There's CEO, there's peers, there's direct reports, there's all kinds of other people. So all those other people involved in the interview process, what are they talking about? Who is, are they told what to ask? Are they told what to assess for? I'm curious what you've seen work really well in terms of all of those other interviews that are happening and prepping those stakeholders and getting feedback. That too.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's quite loaded because oftentimes I think we have an internal barometer of like, oh, I know what good looks like, especially for a role that reports directly to us that we need to hire for as hiring managers. But then we kind of often just make the leap or sometimes the assumption that, oh, if I ask, let's say you and I worked at the same company somewhere, and I'm hiring a financial analyst. And I picked that because I'm not in finance whatsoever. I don't really know what they do. And so I say, hey, Summer, I just met this awesome financial analyst for our company. Can you interview them for me and see what you think? And you're just going, sure, happy to. What you're really assessing for, what I'm really asking for you to do, is to see whether or not you're going to be able to work with this person. But I'm not really teeing you up to assess a skill set. I'm not really giving you a barometer as to what good looks like. You don't have any context on all the other 4 or 5 candidates that I've already spoken to that I've rejected out of the process. And so
Hmm.
you're kind of going into it a little bit with your own assumptions of what a financial analyst should do, how they should behave, and what good might look like. So my
Yeah.
advice to most organizations and hiring managers, especially in my previous experience as a head of recruiting, is not only do you need to prepare your team, whether that's your direct reports, other teammates, your peers, um, C-suites, it doesn't matter who's in your panel. You've got to prepare them for the interview questions that you're trying to get them to ask. One. Two, you got to give them examples of what a good answer might look like and what a weak answer might look like. That can help ground their feedback a little bit more. Of course, there's a section for their questions and what they typically ask in an interview, but if you're not giving them that kind of structure, debriefs turn into I like them, I don't like them, and it's harder to make a decision without this kind of structure if that helps. Oh, and the other thing to add into the interview questions as well is your mission, visions, and values. If you can tie at least 1 or 2 of those into your interview questions, that gives you alignment across the organization, not just for the job and not just for your team.
Yeah. I was going to add when you said I don't know about that, like what I would show up for an interview if I didn't know anything about that candidate. I'd be like, so tell me about yourself. And that's the worst because you never get
Yeah.
that half hour back from your life. You just don't.
No, I mean, you may end up making a friend.
Sure. Yeah.
However, it doesn't help the candidate because you're really not giving them their their time in the interview.
Hmm.
One,
Hmm.
two, um, you're not helping your teammate out because you're not really assessing that skill set. So yeah, the tell me about yourself or well, tell me about your last job or the more generic interview questions. So would you consider yourself a happy person? Those kind of questions aren't really helpful.
So as you were speaking, so I had a client years ago that I mean, I always put them on a pedestal. I think they did this so well. And I took for granted that because they did it so well, that everybody does it so well. And their internal recruiter, first of all, was just very good at what they did. And they had a lot of internal credibility. And they would, sit down or call or, Zoom or whatever with all the different stakeholders and say, hey, this is the candidate. It's for this role. Here's who they met. Here's the feedback. Here's what you're assessing and I'm going to follow up end of day for feedback. Thank you very much. It was just perfect. and I didn't have to do any of that. And then when I worked with other clients, I was just assuming that that was happening. And then,
Mm,
you get candidate feedback and you realize that that's not happening, right? And yeah, it's
yeah.
not. And so now that I've been off on my own, like we talked about in another podcast, like I never want to overstep with a new client, but now I realize they actually want us to give advice on this part of the process. And I've
Hmm.
started to ask clients, hey, or the hiring manager, okay, who do you want involved in the interview process and why? And actually, like, so what can this, rather than me assigning them topics, it's like, what can this person really assess for well? And then just
Hmm.
reminding that person right before the interview, introducing myself in an email. Here's the candidate's resume. Here's all the feedback. Here's my assessment. Here's the role. I also started making video job descriptions with clients, and that's
Mm,
been super helpful because then I can share the video with
mm,
the other stakeholders, and then they get a firsthand view of the hiring manager talking about the role and the mission of the
yep.
company and all that kind of stuff. So it's actually been really nice. And I never thought that was my job, I guess, or it wasn't like it was too much work. I just didn't want to overstep, my role in the process. And yeah, it's been working.
Honestly, I don't think you are, because I think those aspects of helping an organization make the right hire includes things like giving examples of how an interview should be run. What are the critical questions that need to be asked? How do you process that information? You're asking the hard questions with the hiring manager early. So there's not a mad scramble 10 minutes before an interview, and I get a message on Slack, "Hi, I am interviewing Susie for this job. What am I supposed to cover?" That should
Right.
never happen in an organization, but you'd laugh at how many times it actually does. So I think that preparation is key. It is more work in the beginning, which is oftentimes why there's no time to have it done. The example you gave, that's a fantastic recruiter. Hold on to that person because they're really good at what they do. It's really hard to do well, especially if that function doesn't exist in a smaller or startup organization, or you're in between recruiting support, or your recruiting support is external only. That's sometimes inconsistent. So I would encourage hiring managers to spend a minute or two kind of thinking through who your interview panel is. What do you want them to ask? What are you trying to get out of it? How does that align with mission, vision, and values? And asking them for feedback immediately, because we all know there's 90 other things to attend to. So if we don't write our feedback down or we don't share it right away, they all blur together.
I love it. Well, Zen, it was so good to talk to you about this today. Thanks again for joining me, and I will see you next week.
I will talk to you next week.